Hello everyone, my name is Michael, and today I'm going to show you how to mix live music. Now, have you ever wondered how to control your mixes or what parts to prioritize? Well, today I'm going to go over some concepts, some priorities, and end with a mixing example to help you be able to mix your music in-house better and more efficiently. So let's start with some concepts real quick. Now, sound, as obvious as it is perceived by our ears. Now, we can use our eyes to gauge things, but at the end of the day, the process has to be done by our ears. So make sure that even though we're able to visualize some of these things, that you're still using your ears when you're mixing. So there's three major concepts to sound. First is volume, which is how we perceive a sound's distance front to back. So if we wanted to hear something louder or closer, we would take one of the mixing sliders and we would boost them up, and that would make it sound closer by increasing the volume. And vice versa, by reducing it, we would make it sound further and further away. You can also use delay or reverb, and we can talk about that in another video. But those effects will also give you a perception of distance. The second thing is panning. Now, if you have a stereo system, which I would really suggest that you set up a stereo system in-house. And that's just, a stereo system is where you have two different speakers, so that way your ears can perceive sound from two different directions, from your left side and your right side. That's how our ears hear naturally, and it's better to mix that way because it sounds more natural and it's easier to separate the items in your mix. Either way, back to the panning. We can control that by using this knob right here, which allows us to pan to the right and to the left. So if you have similar instruments, it's really super simple. You just pan one really close to hard right and another one really close to hard left. Kind of just separates those, and your ears can pick them up differently. One note real quick is we don't pan anything that's really deep, like our basses, our kicks. Our ears cannot perceive panned objects as well in the deeper frequencies, and so we typically leave those front and center. All right. So the last thing is frequency. Let me give you an example here. I'm going to insert a plugin, and this is an equalizer. What this does is this measures the sound on two different levels. On the bottom hand side, we have frequencies. As you can see, there's 10, 20, 50, 100, 200. It goes all the way up to 40K here. But you can see these dotted lines right here. Those represent our audible hearing range, and there's not many sound systems that I know of that can go beyond this range. So our human hearing range is between 20 and 20,000 hertz. Next, you can see on the scale on the left hand side is decibel levels. So we can see whether a sound of a certain frequency peaks at 0 decibels, it could go above like 6 or 9 decibels, or below -6, -9, -12. So 0 is just our reference point as the middle sound. This is where you want to keep things, or you'll be able to measure it as the middle point right here. And another thing to note is these frequencies, even though they're numbers, they're not just numbers. Each one of these numbers represent a note on the musical scale. If you've been in a orchestra, you probably are very familiar with the fact that you will tune your instruments to A440. Now, A440, that number 440 is 440 hertz, and that represents I believe it's A4 on the piano. Now, in order to produce a higher A, you would double that number. So let's say, from 440 around here, we would go to 880 up here. Or if we want to go an octave down, we would half that number from 440 to 220, and half it and half it and half it. So that produces all of our different notes on the octaves up and down. Now, that should give you a little bit of a clue here when using an equalizer to shape sound is that the notes down here in the lower end are a lot more sensitive, frequency number by frequency, than it is up here, because those octaves and those notes are placed closer together. So just be careful of that. Realize that this area down here in the bottom end of the graph is a lot more squished together. Now we will talk about equalizers in another video as well, but just to let you know, you can use an equalizer to measure, to display a sound in a top to bottom format, like brighter sounds on the top, deeper sounds on the bottom. In your mind and in your ears, you'll perceive them from top to bottom. All right, so now that we've gone through that, let's talk a little bit about our priorities when mixing music. Now, every single genre has a different set of priorities. For instance, if we were to play jazz music, we would have the drums kind of a little bit softer and the vocals real up front with that brass right up front, as opposed to what we will be using, which is similar to pop music, but worship music is pretty much close to that. And that is where we want to prioritize the kick, the snare, and the bass. So there we go. We've got the drums, the kick and the snare, we've got the bass, and then we want to prioritize the lead vocals. Those 4 things. So if you have a pencil and a paper, I would write those things down so that way you can remember those. But those are the most important things in the mix. You want all of those things front and center. Once again, that's the kick, the snare, the bass, and the lead vocal. Now, if you do not have a lead vocal, you can replace that with an instrumental voice, just an instrument that acts as a lead voice. But in a traditional house of worship, we're probably going to have some vocals. Now, if you do not have a drum kit, there are other methods to do that by using some kind of reference point, such as white noise or something. Once again, we could talk about that in another video, but I'm going to go ahead and use this mix that I have right here to give you an example of how to use these and produce your mix. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm actually going to start out by playing just a little bit of this. I'm going to skip this forward just a little bit, and let's play just a little bit of it just so you can get here for it. All right, so the first thing you probably could tell is there is a lot in there, and they all sound kind of, there's no contrast in the music. It all sounds sent in the center and muddy, and you can't really hear anything over another thing. Another thing you probably notice is there's a lot of tracks here. There's like 50 tracks on this. Now, most churches aren't going to have 50 tracks. Some bigger churches will have bigger tracks because more tracks because they have more microphones. Just to add more stereo, more instruments in stereo and other things such as loops in the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and solo some of the instruments that you might expect to find in a typical church. So let's see. If we come over here, I can put some keys in there. As you can see, I'm going to solo these so that way you can hear them. I'm going to add, this is an electric guitar if I'm pretty certain. Gonna add a bass. All right, this should be acoustic guitar right here. We add some vocals. Let's do 1, 2, 3 vocals. And let's add, okay, so we've got our kick, our snare, and there we go. All right, so let's play this back again. All right, I just noticed there's no drum section in this part. I'm gonna skip it forward a little bit. Let's take a look here. All right, so as you can see, we've got all of our instruments set to their proper levels, but to start out with their gain. But we need to go ahead, we can't hear the vocals at all, and we can see that electric guitar is really overpowering because it's so much brighter and so much more filling. Let's start, this is how we're going to start a mix. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to solo the kick. Now the kick is always our reference for everything else, and we'll use our ears and add everything in relative to the kick. So in our mix, we're going to start just by listening to the kick. Nope, I forgot to remove the keys. Let's try that again. All right. So we've got our kick in there. Now right here, we do have two mics on this kick. We've got a kick in and a kick out. That'll just get two different sounds. The microphone that's placed on the outside of the sound will get a little bit of a deeper sound there. The kick in will probably be vice versa. So let's kind of just get those set relative to each other. All right, so the next thing we want to do is add a snare. I'm going to start with the snare bottom. So we don't want it as quite as loud as that. There we go. Sounds pretty good relative to that. Now we do have two of these, snare bottom and snare top. Each of these, once again, will produce a little bit of a different sound off of the snare. We'll just want to adjust these. So you can see how the bass has been prioritized there. All right, now let's go ahead and add our bass in. Oh, let's try that over again. Let's go ahead and start by adding some vocals in. Jesus, sing what a friend I found in Jesus. What a life. And we can go ahead and add some other ones. All my darkest days are over. He's redeeming everything. I'm alive with eyes wide open. I've tasted and I've seen. In too deep to turn back now. How could I not believe? I'm so glad I met Jesus. Didn't know what I needed. All right, so notice how I've got the notice how I have the harmonies down a little bit. You do need to be careful about having the harmonies up too high, because if this is, in a worship service, you want to be able to hear the melody and allow the congregation to be able to sing with the melody, rather than having them going all over the place because they hear the harmony so loud that they're starting to sing the harmony, and it just gets really confusing. Now, yes, do make sure that you can try to get it in there to hear. You do want to hear all those harmonies, but you want them to add to it, not take over it. All right, so that mix right there is pretty much the foundational mix. We've got our kick, our snare, our bass, and our lead vocals. Now we can go ahead and add some of those other instruments on the sides. And since these don't have to be front and center, we can both, adjust how loud we want them, and we can pan them off to the side. Now you do want to be careful with panning, because you want to be able to balance it. Imagine, the left and the right are kind of like a scale. You want to balance the sound, so that way you don't have too much on one side or too much on the other. So if you put something on one side, try to put something on the other side. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Okay, so another thing I want to make apparent is you not only have to pan tracks one way or another, but if you have a stereo set of tracks, like one that says left and right, and you're using both of them in the mix, you can actually make the instrument appear wider or shorter in the mix by panning part of the instrument to the left and part of the instrument to the right. So that way it makes the field of view of that instrument feel wider. And vice versa. If you crisscross them over a little bit, such as taking the right one and moving over to the left a little bit and moving the left channel and crisscrossing it to the right a little bit, you can kind of make it sound a little bit thinner, because typically these microphones or channels will be the differences between the higher frequencies and the lower frequencies. So crisscrossing them a little bit will make it sound a little bit thinner. So let's go ahead and take a look at that example of that. I'm going to use this keys to widen it up. Traditionally, I would work on finishing the rest of the drums while just soloing the All right, there we go. So that's pretty close to as close as we can get for getting a pretty even mix without adding any plugins like equalizers, compressors, reverb, etc. So it is very important that you get your mix to a good place before adding all those plugins. So there we go. Just remember that you want to start with your kick, your snare, your bass, and your lead vocal. Now, I do want to make a quick note here. If you're not using your headphones to mix, you do need to make sure, and you probably should anyways, you got to make sure that the speakers in the house are tuned. Because what you're going to hear in the mix on your headphones is going to be different than what you hear in the house if your speakers are playing different things. Do you know what I mean? So you probably should get somebody to take care of that professionally, or if you want to look it up and try to figure out how to do that yourself. But it is very important, if you want to hear everything in your mix, if your speakers are taking out certain frequencies of sound and you don't even realize it, it's going to make it very difficult for you to hear it in the house after you finish mixing it. So that's pretty much everything I have for you all today. So I hope this really helps you out. I hope you can take what I've showed you here and apply it to your mixes from here on out. Thank you for watching.